They cast you out, whispering behind closed doors, weaving their plans to isolate you, to make you the lone wolf. They believed solitude would break you, that the silence would swallow your spirit whole. But they were wrong. What they meant for your downfall became your forge. In the quiet, you found your strength. In the shadows, you sharpened your claws. Now you walk the streets not as an outcast, but as a force they can no longer ignore. Your solo fight has forged you into something unstoppable, superhuman, unshakable, the big boss of the town. And as they watch from the sidelines, their regret burns hotter than their schemes ever did. You were never their pawn. You were always the chosen one. They didn't come at you with fists. That would have been too obvious. No, their weapons were sharper, more insidious. Gaslighting, silent betrayals, the kind of wounds that don't leave bruises but cut far deeper. They twisted words, distorted reality, made you question your own mind. They whispered half-truths to turn allies into enemies, slowly tightening the walls around you until there was nowhere left to run. The plan was meticulous. Strip you of resources, erode your confidence, leave you scrambling for scraps of validation. They wanted you disoriented, doubting, desperately seeking approval from the very hands that pushed you away. If they could make you second-guess your own worth, the battle was already won, and for a moment, it almost worked. But chosen ones don't fold under pressure. They adapt. Where others break, they sharpen. Where others beg, they strategize. They expected you to crumble under the weight of their mind games, but instead, you studied the board. You watched. You learned. Every insult, every exclusion, every betrayal was cataloged, analyzed, turned into data for the inevitable counterstrike. They mistook your silence for submission. They thought the lack of a reaction meant they had won. But you weren't broken. You were evolving. At first, the loneliness felt like a slow death. It wasn't just the absence of voices. It was the weight of knowing you had been discarded, cast aside like you never mattered. The silence mocked you, filling the space where laughter and conversation used to be. Nights stretched longer, thoughts turned darker, and doubt crept in like a venomous whisper. Were they right about you? Had you been the problem all along? You replayed the moments, the betrayals, the cold shoulders, searching for answers that never came. The worst part wasn't the isolation itself. It was the gnawing uncertainty, the feeling of losing yourself. You fought against it, clinging to the remnants of what once was. You reached out, hoping someone would extend a hand, but all you met was distance. They had made their choice, and in that moment, the truth cut deeper than any knife. No one was coming to save you. The world had moved on, and you had been left behind. The realization was a wound, but it was also a turning point. There was no one left to rely on, no one left to validate you. It was either sink beneath the weight of it all or stand up on your own. And so you stood. The loneliness that once felt like a curse became something else entirely, a forge. Without the distractions of shallow conversations and meaningless social games, you had nothing left but time. Time to think, time to dissect every mistake, every lesson, every battle, time to become dangerous. The solitude stopped feeling like exile and started feeling like training. You read, you learned, you pushed yourself past limits you didn't know existed. The silence that once mocked you now sharpened you. You were no longer wasting energy seeking acceptance from people who never deserved you. This wasn't rejection. It was an initiation, a shedding of weakness, a transformation into something stronger, something unstoppable. They thought they had banished you to the shadows, but they had only given you space to evolve. And when the time came to step back into the world, it would not be as an outcast. It would be as a force. They thought they had stripped you of power, but in reality, they had freed you to find your own. Every betrayal, every closed door, Every whispered insult became another hammer strike against the steel of your will. You did not shatter, you hardened. You learned to move in silence, to see through deception, to read the unspoken language of power. The things that once wounded you now became your armor. Where others sought comfort, you embraced the storm. They avoided difficulty, but you faced it head-on, letting the struggle mold you into something sharper, something deadlier. They had the luxury of taking the easy route, of relying on connections, of coasting on privilege. But you had to build yourself from the ground up, and in doing so, you gained something they never would. An edge carved from experience, a mind sharpened by hardship. The fire that was meant to consume you had become your forge, tempering your soul into something they could no longer break. At first, they dismissed your resilience. They thought your silence meant surrender. But while they were busy celebrating their small victories, you were evolving. You took every rejection, every underestimation, every moment of pain, and turned it into fuel. You became methodical, disciplined, relentless. You learned patience. You learned precision. And with each passing day, the version of you they tried to destroy faded away, replaced by someone colder, stronger, and more dangerous than they ever expected. The town still didn't see it. They still thought they had won. But what they didn't realize was that their actions had set something irreversible into motion. The transformation had already happened, and when they finally noticed, it would be too late. The person they once dismissed was gone, and in their place stood something unshakable, the one they could never break. They stripped you of everything, your allies, your comforts, your place among them, believing that without their approval, you would wither. What they didn't understand was that in taking everything, they unknowingly gave you the one thing they never wanted you to have: absolute self-sufficiency. They needed the group to survive. They needed validation, reassurance, and constant affirmation. But you learned to need nothing. You found strength in solitude, clarity in silence, and power in the realization that you owed no one anything. While they spent their days maintaining their fragile social web, you spent yours mastering yourself. You became your own source of power. You built skills, honed discipline, sharpened your instincts. While they wasted time chasing acceptance, you built an empire of the mind. The difference was stark. They moved with the herd, fearful of standing alone. You stood alone by choice, untethered, unrestricted, unstoppable. They had spent their entire lives avoiding isolation, but you had embraced it, conquered it, and transformed it into something deadly. By the time they realized what had happened, it was already too late. The one they had cast out had become the one they now feared. You didn't need their approval anymore. They needed yours. They sought your insight, your strength, your guidance. The power dynamic had shifted, and they weren't ready for it. The ones who once ignored you now watched in uneasy silence, realizing they had made a terrible mistake. They underestimated what solitude could create. They thought leaving you behind would erase you, but instead, it forced you to build. You built your mind, your skill, your influence. And while they were busy maintaining their fragile status, you were rising in silence. You didn't wait for their approval. You didn't ask for permission. You took the throne they didn't even realize was up for the taking. Now, the power balance has shifted. The same people who once turned their backs now seek your validation. The same ones who ignored you now move carefully in your presence. They thought they could dictate the game, but what they failed to realize was that you had rewritten the rules. You no longer move like an outsider. You move like the one in control, and that is what truly terrifies them. You're not just a presence anymore. You're a force. The town didn't crown you. You built your throne from the ground up. And now, whether they like it or not, they must acknowledge what they tried so hard to deny. You were never beneath them. You were always above. And now, let us take a brief moment to honor the chosen among us. Here's to the ones who see the world differently. The silent guardians, the watchful souls, always awake, always vigilant. They don't fit the mold, and they wouldn't have it any other way. While others walk familiar paths, they forge their own, fighting unseen battles, illuminating the shadows. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. But if you feel it deep within, you'll know this is meant for you. No masks, no pretense, just truth. The Obsidian Inner Order is here, a place where kindred spirits gather to share wisdom, to connect, to transform. Over 450 strong, united not by conformity, but by purpose. If you're ready, you know where to find us. The link is in the description. If not, that's perfectly fine, because we're always here, watching over, making a difference in ways unseen. Here's to those who walk their own path, not for recognition, but because it's who they are. Here's to you. Thank you. Regret is a slow poison, and now it lingers in their veins. They replay every decision, every moment they pushed you aside, every insult they thought was harmless. It was supposed to be fun, ostracizing you, making you the outsider, ensuring you stayed beneath them. But now, as they watch you rise, that amusement has turned to dread. They see it clearly now. They did not break you. They built you. The whispers have changed. Once, they gossiped about your failures, confident you would fade into irrelevance. Now their words are careful, their eyes filled with unease. They wonder if you remember the betrayals, the mockery, the times they left you in the cold. And the truth? You remember everything. But you don't need revenge. Your existence alone is enough to make them suffer. Your success is their worst nightmare because it exposes their greatest weakness. They needed the group to thrive, but you thrived alone. They spent their time scheming against you, while you spent yours sharpening yourself. Now they scramble to find a way back into your world, but the doors they once slammed shut in your face are locked to them. They thought they were the ones in control, that they had the power to decide your worth. But power was never in their hands. It was in yours all along. And now, as they stand on the sidelines, watching you claim everything they swore you'd never have, one truth burns hotter than their shame. They should have never underestimated you. Drop a comment. My mind is my weapon. If you've turned their mind games into fuel, the crowd is a crutch, a false sense of power built on numbers and noise. They always needed each other to feel strong, to validate their importance, to reassure themselves they mattered. But you learned to stand alone. And in that solitude, you uncovered the one truth they never dared to face. Real power doesn't come from the masses. It comes from mastery. While they were busy feeding off each other's approval, you were refining yourself. The silence they feared became your sanctuary. No distractions, no wasted time, no need to impress anyone. Every second was an investment in your evolution. You learned to think strategically, to move with precision, to build without permission. They sought temporary comfort, but you built permanent dominance. They spent their energy playing social games, desperate to stay relevant in the ever-shifting hierarchy. But you had no interest in their games. You were mastering the real one, and that's why they can't touch you anymore. They're loud. You're calculated. They're replaceable. You're irreplaceable. While they sought attention, you built skill. And now the difference between you is undeniable. This is why they fear you now. They see it in your presence, in the way you move, the way you speak. You are no longer part of their world. You exist above it. And no matter how desperately they try to regain control, one fact remains unshakable. You don't need them, but they will always need you. Power isn't about dominance. It's about control over oneself. The weak seek to rule over others because they lack control over their own emotions. their own desires, their own minds. That's why they formed their fragile alliances, why they needed the approval of the crowd to feel important. But true power doesn't beg for recognition. It exists whether others acknowledge it or not, and that's the power you have now, the kind they can't take away. They played checkers while you mastered chess. Their victories were fleeting, based on momentary influence and shallow connections. But you were patient. You understood that real power isn't about quick wins, it's about long-term control. You didn't seek revenge because you didn't need it. You let time do the work for you. Now the people who once laughed at you struggle to find their footing while you move with unwavering certainty. The true leaders, the ones who shape the world, do not chase approval. They create movements. They don't waste time proving themselves to those who never mattered. They build. They strategize. They move in silence until their presence is undeniable. That is why you stand where you do now, while they flounder, still playing the game of the powerless. Their mistake was believing that power was about control over others. But you mastered the greatest power of all, control over yourself. You no longer react, you dictate. You no longer seek validation, you command respect effortlessly. And that's why they can't compete with you. They're still chasing what you already conquered. The chosen ones do not rise because they are given a crown. They rise because they become the foundation upon which everything else is built. You no longer fight for a seat at the table. You own the table. And those who once dismissed you, they now wait for your decisions, knowing that you are the one who dictates the rules. Powerful shifts don't happen quietly. When one chosen one rises, it sends shockwaves through the world. Your transformation was never just about you. It was a signal to everyone still trapped in the shadows, still questioning their worth, still bound by the chains of doubt. They watched you rise from nothing, from exile, from the place where they were told no one returns. And now they know the truth. It's possible to break free. Your story is no longer just your own. It has become a blueprint, a legend whispered among those who once felt powerless. They see your strength, your resilience, your refusal to bow, and they begin to wonder if they too have that fire inside them. They do, but they needed proof. And you? You became that proof. The ones who tried to break you never considered this consequence. They never thought that in forging you, they were also forging others. That every move you made, every step you took toward dominance, was being studied by those still waiting for their moment. Your rise was not just a victory, it was a revolution. Now the town doesn't just belong to you. It has changed because of you. The rules are no longer the same, and the old ways no longer hold power. Those who once feared stepping out of line now stand taller, speak louder, move bolder. And the ones who tried to silence you? They watch in horror as their control slips through their fingers, undone by the very thing they tried to destroy. This is the legacy of the chosen one, not just to rise, but to awaken others. Not just to survive, but to redefine the game itself. And as you walk through streets that once rejected you, there is no longer any doubt. You didn't just change yourself, you changed everything. Confidence, authority, presence. These aren't things you were given. They are things you built, things you earned through fire and solitude. They tried to rob you of them, stripping away your support, forcing you into the shadows, thinking that without validation, you would crumble. But they never understood the truth. Power is not something handed down. It is something taken. And now you walk with a presence so undeniable that even those who once ignored you now feel your weight before you even speak. This is big boss energy. The shift is unmistakable. You see it in their eyes, in the way they hesitate before speaking to you, in the nervous laughter that wasn't there before. They no longer talk about you like they once did. They talk around you, uncertain, afraid of saying the wrong thing, because now your presence dictates the tone of the room. While they once controlled the narrative, they now wait for your reaction, adjusting themselves to the energy you command. That's real power. Unlike them, you do not move with hesitation. You do not scan faces for approval, nor do you adjust your words to fit the comfort of the weak. You speak, they listen. You act, they react. The ones who once tried to mold your reality to fit their own have lost control, watching as you move through life with an unshakable certainty they will never possess. They built their identities on fragile acceptance. You built yours on undeniable self-mastery. But the greatest power move wasn't proving them wrong. It was proving yourself right. You never needed their approval. You never needed their validation. You were never beneath them. They just wanted you to believe you were. Now they sit in silence, grappling with the reality that everything they feared about you, your strength, your resilience, your ability to thrive without them, was true all along. And that truth stings more than any revenge ever could. Because in the end, you didn't just rise, you transcended. And the best part? You did it all without them. Years from now, they will still speak your name, not as the outcast, not as the one they tried to break, but as the one who rose beyond them all. They will tell the story in hushed voices, recounting how they thought they had buried you, how they believed they had the power to erase you. But the truth will remain. You were never forgotten. You became unforgettable. They always believed they held the pen, that they had the power to decide your fate. But the truth became undeniable. They were never the authors. They were merely side characters in a much greater narrative, one where you emerged not just as a survivor, but as an icon. While they wasted time scheming, grasping for fleeting relevance, you built something permanent. They fought for control over a world too small to contain you. You were always destined for something greater. And now you walk in spaces they will never reach. But this was never just about proving them wrong. It was about proving yourself right. Every moment of solitude, every scar, every lesson forged in fire led you here, not just to success, but to transformation. You are no longer the person they cast out. You are the one they can never ignore again. Now, as you walk through the same streets where they once whispered about you, their eyes tell the full story: respect, fear, regret. They know, even if they never admit it, that they should have chosen a different path, that they should have stood beside you instead of against you. But it's too late for them now, because you didn't just survive, you became legend.